We're on page Nun Zayin, and the paragraph starting with the word shishis. The sixth facet of chesed, which he discusses here, is esek achai imames. All of the mitzvahs associated with the livings tending to the needs of the dead. And we spoke about how there's a difference between tzedakah and chesed. The Gemara makes that, understands that tzedakah is monetary, and chesed is usually a physical an action. So one of the distinctions that the Gemara makes between tzedakah and chesed is that tzedakah is done with the living, because you monetarily provide for the needs of the living. But chesed can be done with the living and with the dead. And that's related to a term that we often refer to as chesed shel emes. Why is it called chesed shel emes? Because it's not tzedakah, it's chesed. It's not monetary, it's bodily. And one explanation of why it's called chesed shel emes is because it's not considered to be reciprocal. If you help somebody monetarily, you can expect some monetary reciprocity. If you help a person physically, you can expect some type of retribution. But a person who does something good for the dead does so purely, with true intent, without the possibility of us expecting anything in return, because the dead can't return anything.
That's not true.
Yeah, but that... yeah.
In this physical world,
yeah.
because they pray up to they
right. Yeah, it's true. But you're not going to be able to... The dead is not really going to be able to do for you anything practical or tangible in this world. Yeah. Can't do anything. So that's one of the reasons why it's called chesed shel emes. So dealing with the needs of the dead is called chesed shel emes. We'll see a little bit more as we go along. So this is esek achai imames. The sixth facet of the chesed is the involvement that the living does with the dead. And that involves, for example, purifying the body of the dead, cleansing it, immersing it in a mikvah before it's buried, wrapping it in white clothing, shrouds, burying the body, praying on behalf of the deceased. These are all different mitzvahs associated with tending to the needs of the dead. Pardon me? Yeah, shomer, yeah. So these are some of the mitzvahs that the author here is going to be discussing in terms of what we actually do for the dead when we're doing chesed shel emes, and how and are the basis for describing how when we're involved in these actions, it has actually an effect on the supernal realm, the realm of the Spheros as well. V'davar zeh ech yisyaches lamala kosher me'od. The way in which this matter of doing chesed shel emes, tending to the needs of the dead, is connected and correlates to what's happening on high is kasher me'od. How do they translate that there? Kasher me'od?
Difficult to explain.
Oh, it's difficult to explain. So this is going to be a difficult little section. The other ones have been easy. This one's going to be a little more difficult. Ki hu sod haspheros shehem misalmos ve'mistalkos el nartikon namala. Because this is connected to the mysterious way in which the Spheros are elevated, the mistalkos, and are removed, and it's a play on words, where listalek is often a term that's used to refer to somebody who dies. He departs. He's elevated and removed from this world. Right? He's mistalek. So he's using this word here in connection to the Spheros as well. That the Spheros undergo some type of experience which is akin to death, burial, and removal. El nartikon namala, to their kind of coffins. That coffin is not the right word, but to their, I'm thinking of containers. I don't know if there's a better word. There's probably a more elegant word to use here. But their nartikon, their place. Chamber. Yeah. A nartik is like a box, a covering. But here too, clearly, of course, it's a play on the idea of the coffin. So the Spheros undergo something which is akin to death. Only it's in a positive sense and not in the negative sense. We normally death has a negative connotation for us. and he's comparing the process of what happens to the Spheros to death, but not in the negative sense as we would associate it with, but the positive sense. Right? That through death, a person is actually elevated. So going through this type of so he's describing the elevation of the Spheros, which is a good thing, with the analogy of death, where the external physical shell remains below, but the internal component is elevated and actually creates a yichud. So, the analogy is initially a bit misleading, but this is the point. That just as the soul is removed and departs from this world upon death, so the spheros have a spiritual elevation as well. And they become deposited in their place, in their chamber. Letaknon. How much, therefore, a person has to work on rectifying, setting straight, like you would set straight the limbs of the body that you're preparing after death for burial. Ularchitzan, and to bathe them, the spheros, as you would bathe the body in order to purify it. Mikol chelos avon, from any impurity of transgression. Ulahalbishon levanim, and to enclothe them with white garments, a reference to the way in which we enclothe the dead body with shrouds. Libune haspheros, which is the purifying of the spheros. So what he's saying is, just as we are engaged with these activities with the dead body, namely, we align the limbs of the body, and we bathe the body, and we enclothe the body in shrouds, so too, when we're doing these things, what happens is that the spheres themselves become aligned. They become purified. They become enveloped with light and energy. And all of this is for the purpose of the very elevating experience, which is akin to the elevation of the souls. And all of this is done, b'or ma'aseh tov, that the spheres should be enveloped with the light of good deeds. Ulis alos besod echad, and to therefore be elevated in the mystery of one, meaning to become absolved in the oneness of God. And this is describing in a dynamic which is kind of the counterpart to Malkus, which is a receptacle for all, going up actually to in the opposite direction, which is Keser, thank you, Keser, which is the repository for all. Malkus is the receptacle, and Keser is the repository. So what he's talking about, what?
Wouldn't it be Yesod, Keser?
Did I say Keser?
Yeah, isn't the above one Yesod?
No. Oh, well, Yesod is above Malchus.
Oh.
But we're talking.
Keser is very top.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
Just going,
Yes,
okay.
because here we're talking about fusing everything into one.
Mm-hmm.
So that takes place in two places. It takes place in Malchus, where after differentiation and refraction, everything is received into Malchus, right? And it's all one. So that Malchus is klali, it's general, insofar as it receives and has within it the hashpah of all of the different spheros. The counterpart to that is in Keser, where again, all of the spheros are unified, but not as a receptacle, but in a repository, right? And it's from that repository of Keser where you have this beautiful oneness of God, that there is a refraction, like kind of through a spiritual prism, resulting in the different spheros, which then ultimately regathered and reunified back into Malchus again. So here, we're talking not so much as we've been talking about in the previous examples, of aligning things so that there should be a flow below and received properly by Malchus, but we're actually talking now about elevation. Going back to the source, which is all in Malchus, which is all in Keser. So that dealing with the dead body and the acts involved with that are about ensuring that the person's soul will be restored and elevated back to its source. When we do that, that's equivalent to interacting with the spheros in a way which will bring them back to their source, to be revitalized, re-energized, reharmonized, back into Keser, a type of a spiritual elevation. And l'koshram lamala, in order to tie them on high, v'lesesosam alakotef, and to carry them on our shoulders. Again, an obvious reference to tending to the dead, where the bier is carried on the shoulders of the carriers, the pallbearers, carrying on the kasef, on the shoulder. There's more to say about this. I'm trying to find a place to stop and then go back. I see everything separated by commas. It's all one run-on. Sod ilu yasfiros echas el echas, which is the mystery of the elevation of the spheros because of their interconnectedness one to the other. Ad sheyisalu lamala mi'akasef, until they're all elevated above the shoulder. Shutchilas chibur hazroya beguf, which is the beginning of the connection of the arm to the body. That's the shoulder. Ulamal mizeh husod heilam she'en asagabo, and above that, above the shoulder, you have the head, the mystery of that which is hidden. She'en hasagabo, and we have no notion of what that really is. So let's go back a bit. We spoke about here how here in tending to the needs of the dead, these are actions which are intended to help ensure a smooth transition from the person in this world to the next. And as we're engaged in this smooth transition of the elevation of the soul into the spiritual world, we're having a parallel effect of the elevation of the spiros in the spiritual world. So we're talking about here dealing with the needs of the dead by really tending to the needs of the soul of the dead. And we mentioned how there are 5 different levels of soul. There's Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, and Yechidah. And the Ramchal says that these 5 levels of soul that we discussed are actually connected to 5 different parts of the actual spheres themselves. So that Nefesh corresponds to Malkus. The lowest level of the soul corresponds to the lowest sphere, which is Malchus. And just like Malchus gives that energy into the realm of creation, so to Nefesh gives energy to our physical form in creation, that's the body. Above that, Ruach corresponds to the Vak, to the 6 spheros above Malchus, right? Which are Chesed, Gvurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Chod, and Yesod. That's Ruach. And just like those 6 spheros are like the letter Vav in Hashem's name, so too it corresponds to the level of soul, which is Ruach, which is kind of like that conduit or that moving channel between the upper spheros and the lowest. So that Nefesh corresponds to Malchus and Ruach corresponds to those 6 lower spheros. Above that, you've got Neshama. Neshama corresponds to Bina. Okay?
So Chaya must be Devorah?
What's that? No, Bina is above that. Gvurah is part of the Ruach. Gvurah is part of the 6, right?
Oh, it must be...
Chesed, Gvurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Chod, Yesod. That's part of the 6. Above Malchus, that corresponds to the Vav, that corresponds to the Ruach. That's the Chibur. Okay? So the Ruach, in fact, is the Chibur. It is the connection between the Nefesh to the body and the Neshama to the upper realm. And therefore it corresponds to those 6 connecting spheros, which is the Vav, the channel, the conduit between Bina and Malchus. So that Bina corresponds to the Neshama. Bina corresponds to the Neshama. And Bina is understanding. And we define that there's a pasuk which says, Nishmas Hashem Havinam, that through the soul of God He will cause them to understand, which makes a connection between Bina and Neshama. And we've said all along that Neshama corresponds to thought, as opposed to Nefesh, which is action, and Ruach, which is to speech. Right? Neshama is thought, and therefore it's relevant to the Sphero of Bina. So now you've got Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama. Above that, you've got Chaya. Chaya would correspond to Abba, or Chochmah. Okay? Where Chaya is kind of like the source of life, which is planted into Bina, and then flows from Bina down into the lower sources, the lower spheros, which is Ruach, finally coming to rest in Malchus, which is Nefesh. So now you've got Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, right? Which means, where's Yechidah? Keser. Keser is Yechidah. What is Yechidah? Yochid, one, the oneness. So that's what we're talking about here, is elevating the Spheros back into one. Where's the one? The one which is the repository, the highest Sphera, that is that of Keser. So that when you're dealing with these actions of taking care of the needs of the dead, what you're actually doing is elevating the different parts of his neshama. Nefesh to ruach, ruach to neshama, neshama to chaya, chaya to yechidah. And as those different parts of the deceased soul are elevated one to the other, they're actually elevated into the spiritual realm through the plane of the spheres, which correspond to each level of the soul. Nefesh and Malkus, ruach in the 6 lower spheres, neshama in bina, chokhmah in neshama in bina, chaya in chokhmah, and then yechidah into keser, into keser. So it's actually an amazing thing. As we are kind of cleansing the body, and then orienting the limbs, and then and then enshrouding it with shrouds, and finally burying it and putting it into its resting place, we're actually going through these stages where each part of the soul is reconnected to the next and elevated until it finally reaches the place, its proper place, which is in Keser. So this is the idea here, therefore, of through the actions of dealing with the needs of the dead, which are really focused on the elevating of the neshama, we actually are elevating the corresponding spheros to each level of soul and bringing them back to their origin, yechidah, which is keser. According to all this, you can understand why dealing with the needs of the dead is called chesed shel emes. Why? Because if you don't have Aleph, what are you left with? Mes.
Oh, man.
Right?
MS
Emes is truth. Chesed shel emes, we started off by saying, is a term referring to taking care of the needs of the dead. Why is this specific? And I made a distinction between staka and chesed. And chesed, with the mes, called chesed shel emes. And I said that's true on the one level because it's not reciprocated. Now after having explained what I just explained, what it is that we do for the soul when we take care of the needs of the dead, and how that has an effect on the spheros, which correspond in turn to each level of the soul. Now I'm coming back and explaining why Chesed Shel Emes makes sense on another level as well. Why is it called Chesed Shel Emes? If you take off the Aleph, you're left with Mem Taf. Mem Taf is Mes, the dead. What you're doing when you're doing Chesed Shel Emes is you're elevating the Mes, the Mem Taf, to Aleph. What's Aleph? The source. Right? What is Mem? Malchus. What is Taf? Tiferes. In Chesed Shel Emes, what you're doing is you're elevating the Malchus, which is the Nefesh, to Tiferes, which is the Ruach, and you're bringing them back to their source through Bina and Chokhmah into their origin, which is right, Aleph or Keser. So Chesed Shel Emes is doing the needs, taking care of the physical needs of the dead body, which really is a way of elevating the different parts of his soul, which really is connected to the elevation of the Spheros, which therefore becomes Chesed Shel Emes because it aligns Malchus and Tiferes to Aleph, which is Keser, that everything should be reunited back to its source. And this, therefore, is the elevating and the purifying and the enshrouding of the spheros, all with the intention of bringing it back into the source of one, Echad, which is Keser. Lekashram lemala, to tie them on high. Now, ulesesusam al katef. The next point is how we're carrying the dead on our shoulder. What's the pshat shoulder? So shoulder is what? Chesed and Gvura. Right? The shoulders are, well, what did you say? Chochmah and Bina? It could be. The arms correspond to Chesed and Gvura. The places above the arm, the shoulder, right? You could say corresponds to Chochmah and Bina. Yeah, it's true. So very nice. I like that. Very nice. I was connecting it more with the head, but it's true that technically speaking, Chesed and Gvura are the right and left arm, which would mean the connection. He makes that point, right? Lekasham lamala v'leseso sam. What?
Wouldn't it be both because you're using your arms to the shoulder? I mean,
Yeah, but he makes the point here about saying that the shoulder is the connection between the arm and the body. I think. Let's see what he says again. That lekashem lamala, to tie them on high, uleseso sam lekatef, meaning we're elevating these spheros, which are going through a type of istalkus, like death and elevation. And what we do as a result of that is that we elevate them now, the spheros above the katef, above the shoulder. Sod ilui haspheros, which is connected to the mystery of the elevation of the spheros, because you're taking them from a place which is below and elevating them to a place which is high, above the shoulder, and you're carrying them. Echas el echas, one to the other. And this is a reference, I believe, to the interconnectedness that I was talking about. Nefesh to ruach, ruach to neshama, neshama to chaya, chaya to yechidah. And as you're elevating each level of soul to the one above it, you're actually elevating the spheros as well. Until they are elevated above the shoulder. What's this idea of being above the shoulder? It is the beginning of the place of the connection of the arm to the body. The body is the lower part. We're lifting it above the shoulder, which is where the chesed and the gevurah starts, to a place which is above chesed and gevurah, which is obviously a reference to chokhmah bina. Ulamala mizeh, and above chokhmah bina, meaning above the shoulder, hu sod helam she'ena sagabo. That's the hidden place where we have no understanding about it whatsoever. That is keser. Beautiful. That's keser. And that would correspond to the realm of neshama, which is yechidah, which we have no conception of. We have no idea of knowing what it is. The Nefesh Chaim explains, however, that in each of these 5 levels of soul, you have 10 spheros, from keser to malchus. And the malchus of one level of soul is interconnected with the keser of the level of soul below it. So that you actually have malchus of yechidah connected to the keser of chaya. And the malchus of chaya is connected to the keser of neshama. And the malchus of neshama is connected to the keser of ruach. And the malchus of ruach is connected to the keser of nefesh.
So Kesser flows throughout.
Yes. And where's the malchus of nefesh? The malchus of nefesh is going to be in the goof,
What's the goof?
the body. And where is it connected to the body? The blood. As it says in the Torah, V'adam, who? The nefesh. Yeah? So that the malchus of nefesh is actually in the keser of the goof, which is the blood. Like it says, Adam hu nefesh. In the blood you have the nefesh. And that makes perfect sense because we know it's the blood which is really that vital fluid in the body. Unlike body parts like bone and sinew and muscle, which are more physical, right? It's really the blood which is viscous, it's fluid, and therefore less physical. The least physical part of the body, therefore, is our blood. It's not like bone and muscle and tissue and tendons. It's much more ethereal than any of that. So that the most elevated part of the body, which is going to be the keser of the body, is going to be the seat within which the lowest part of the nefesh rests. Right? So the malchus of nefesh is going to be in the keser of the goof. The keser of the goof means the most elevated part of the goof, the most ethereal part of the goof, the least physical and most spiritual part of the body is going to be that blood. Number one. Number two, we know that malchus is about spreading rain over an area. Like it says, Leis melech below am. There's no king without a country. A country without a king without a country is not a king. He's got no populace. He's got no reign to reign over. That he should be considered a king. So therefore, it's appropriate that, right, that the malchus of nefesh is connected specific to the blood. Why? Because therefore it's through the blood which spreads throughout all of the body, and it's not located in just one place. It's through the circulatory aspect of the blood that the malchus of nefesh establishes its reign over the body. Right? The Malkus of Nephesh establishes its sovereignty over the body through the blood. So therefore, that makes sense why the Malkus of Nephesh is actually in the blood. However, as we said, each level of soul is connected to the highest level above it, or the lowest one, the highest, its lowest section is connected to the highest above it. So that if we consider the Malkus of Nephesh being connected to the Keser of the Goof, we should really assume that it should be connected where? Well, the brain. More appropriately, we would think that since you have a connection of Malchus of one level to the Keser of the other, the Malchus of Nephesh should be connected to the Keser of the Goof. And the Keser of the Goof should be its crown. The crown of the body is arguably, very clearly, the head. So how do we connect that with everything we're saying about the blood? So the Arizal explains that the Nefesh is connected to the blood, it's true, but to the most elevated fraction of the blood, which sustains the mind, the brain. So he actually correlates both ideas concurrently, pun intended. Yeah, that the Malchus of Nephesh is connected to the Keser of the Goof, which is the blood that is actually giving vitality at any given time to the brain, which is the central, of course, crown, the crown and glory of the human being, his brain, his mind. Yeah, and I guess the idea would be that as the blood is circulated through the body, the blood that goes into the head is somehow refined. He calls it like the most refined fraction of blood. You can separate blood into different components. Mm-hmm. So the highest fraction of the blood is that which goes into sustaining the brain. And it stays there, and I guess it's somehow kind of replenished each time more oxygenated blood reaches that place. But in any case, this is an attempt to kind of reconcile the idea that the Malchus of Nephesh fits into the Keser of the Goof, or the Keser of the Goof is both the blood, it's being the least physical, and also the brain, right, being the most elevated. And that's the Keser of the Goof. When a person dies, all of these levels of soul are removed. Okay? Nefesh, as the Zohar says, is removed into Ruach. How so? By the virtue of the fact that it's, right, the Keser of Nefesh is in the Malchus of Ruach. So upon death, it all reverts into the Malchus of Ruach, where Malchus is an all-inclusive Sphero. So it takes within it everything which came from it. All of the aspects of Nefesh are therefore recoiled and returned and restored back to their source in Malchus of Ruach. And then, once everything of Nefesh has been restored to Ruach, then Ruach, with now being combined with Nefesh, is reverted back into the Malchus of Neshama, from which it originated. Right? And then the same thing happens with Neshama. Insofar as Neshama is connected through its Keser into the Malchus of Chaya, and it came from it, so it's elevated within it, the Nefesh and the Ruach, and now the Neshama back into Chaya. And then Chaya back into Yechidah through its connection between its Keser and the Malchus of Yechidah. That's called Istalkus. What's happening is there is a removal, stage by stage, of the person from the world. Okay? Now, what happens when when a person is mistalik like that is that all of the mitzvahs that the person did in the realm of his body, which corresponds to Nefesh, are elevated into Ruach. And all of the mitzvahs that he did pertaining to speech and to emotion, are also then elevated into Neshama. So all of the mitzvahs that he did in the plane of thought, like believing in Hashem, and so forth and so on, right, are then elevated back to their source as well. So that when a person dies, he's actually bringing with him, as his soul folds into itself, via all of those spheres, what's happening is all of those mitzvahs are being folded into, wrapped up into, right, this person's spiritual essence. And that's what we mean by, we say, Shetiyeh nishmaso tzurura b'tzura chaim, that the person's soul should be enveloped in the wrapping of life. What's happening is literally here. When a person dies, his soul is literally being folded up And all of the mitzvahs that he's doing is being folded up together with that neshama. And that's the istalkus. All of those mitzvahs, therefore, being taken on high. That's a tremendous elevation. That's a tremendous elevation. What that means is all of the mitzvahs that a person did here, upon departing, that's istalkus, they're all elevated into that very high realm. And when a person's neshama brings with it, hopefully, all of those mitzvahs, that's what causes those spheros to be elevated as well. Because those mitzvahs are becoming included in each level of the soul as it folds up, which then becomes included in the corresponding spheros to each level of soul, which become elevated insofar as they have engulfed within them all of the mitzvahs that a person did. Until then, by and large, they were below, associated with each level of the soul where it's connected here. But when a person dies, he brings all of that with him, and it causes a great, tremendous spiritual elevation. So according to this, when a person dies, it's not a degradation at all. It's actually an elevation. It's actually an elevation. So the question is, so why is there such a thing as tumor? Why is there such a thing as tumor? If such a pure and holy thing is happening, so why is the body
The body's physical.
impure? The body's physical, it's true.
I don't know where I was going with that.
Maybe what you're going with that is that the soul is removing and all these elevated things are happening to the soul in the spiritual realm, but the
And
body
then
is
you're
left disconnected.
Yeah, you're left with nothing.
Okay.
So then that would be tumor.
Yeah.
Nothingness.
It's kind of like a vacuum.
Like you have a compressed like file and then it's nothing. Sorry, I don't know.
Yeah. You're using computer analogies. Yeah. Okay, I like that explanation. In other words, the body is left vacuous and vacant and empty of all of these things, and that results in the tumor. Okay? Very good.
Absence of kedusha.
The absence of the kedusha is a tumor. Nevertheless, we take that body and we bathe it and we purify it. We put it into a mikveh, right? And then we bury it. The soul is not departed until burial. Only after burial takes place does the soul start to become elevated, which is one of the reasons why in Judaism we're very anxious to bury the body as soon as possible. It's a mitzvah to bury in particular, and to bury as soon as possible, and not to delay it. And the reason is because the elevation of the soul depends on the decomposition of the body. The extent to which the body decomposes, it lets go of its hold onto the levels of the soul, so the soul can be elevated. So if that's true, we should say, well then why don't we cremate? Burn the body, get rid of it as fast as possible, reduce it to nothing so that the soul can hurry up on its way.
For the Mashiach.
Yeah, or for its own personal redemption even before Mashiach. The answer is because the soul nevertheless did occupy the body. The body was a vessel for all the important work of the soul, and it's actually described as being a torment to the soul if it's torn out of the body too abruptly. And that's why, while we do want to dispose of the body through burial, we don't burn it. Burial is a slow, gradual, organic decomposition which enables the soul to depart from the body stage by stage in a gradual, easy, more fluid process, because we are talking about Nefesh to Ruach, Ruach to Neshama, Neshama to Chaya, Chaya to Yehidah. And therefore, we don't burn the body. On the other hand, well, if it should be a slow, gradual process, why don't we do something like embalming? No, embalming would be the extreme to the other end, where you're prolonging the decomposition of the body, which would also result in suffering of the soul. The soul is not able to depart from the body fully until the body is decomposed. But keeping it artificially intact for longer than it should be is going to keep the soul locked into the body longer than it needs to be. When the person is buried, the body undergoes a slow, gradual decomposition which enables the soul to depart from it gradually, slowly, but surely, until finally when the body is completely decomposed, the body the soul nearly completely leaves the body. Why do you say nearly completely? Because even though Nefesh goes into Ruach, still there is a Malkus of Nephesh. And that Malkus of Nephesh was located where? We said? In the Kesser of the Goof, either in the blood or the brain or both. That remains. Where? With the body. Even when the body decomposes, you still have a residual element of Malkus of Nephesh. Of Malkus of Nephesh. And that's why the burial place, and particularly the tombstone, is often referred to through the term Nefesh. It's called a Nefesh. What do you mean Nefesh? The Nefesh is soul. The soul was elevated, wasn't it? The answer is, all of the 9 parts of Nefesh were elevated. But Malkus of Nephesh remains where it was, in the body, at least in a residual way. And that gives a type of life and vitality to the buried body there, or at least a potential for life that's buried there, which will be sparked and rekindled anew when? Tchias HaMesim. Right? When we are elevating the Mesim. Right? And there, it's going to be elevating not only Mesim to Malchus, to Tiferes, to Emes, meaning to Aleph, to Keser, but it's actually going to be reintroducing the Malchus Shemayim back into the world and elevating, literally elevating the Mes. So that the Malchus of Nephesh is brought back to the Tiferes of Nephesh. And Tiferes of Nephesh is a reference to those six Spheros, where Tiferes is the central one, yeah? But those 6 Spheros. So it's talking about elevating the Mes, elevating the Malchus, right? The Malchus of Nephesh back to the Tiferes and giving the person a rebirth, a new life. That's Tchias HaMesim. V'chavin b'soda k'vura, and therefore he says, now we're 3 lines down from the bottom. V'chavin b'soda k'vura, and when a person is engaged in the act of k'vura, he should have intention for the pasuk which says, V'yikbor oisoi bagai, that God buried Moshe in the valley. Here we find that Hashem actually buried Moshe. For all of the tzaddikim we find that Hashem gathered them to their people, which is a reference to gathering their souls back into their source. But here, not only did God gather Moses' soul back to his source, but God also was engaged in the actual burial of the body itself. And one explanation of that might be that Moshe was so spiritual that the Nefesh was so elevated by the Ruach and the Neshama and the Chai and the Hidah that even the Malkus of Nephesh, which was in the Keser of his Goof, was so high that it elevated the Goof to be part of the Nefesh. Yeah? Mm-hmm. So that his body was like a soul. It was like an extended Nefesh. And we see that his body emitted light, spiritual light that was so intense and palpable, but that people couldn't look at it. He had to cover his face. But in any case, God therefore buried the body. Why? Because in Moses' case, the body itself was like a soul. So just like God elevates the levels of the soul, dealing with them in order to have them be elevated after death, God dealt with Moses' body, which was like a soul, and buried it himself. Bagai. What's Gai? Gai is the Gematria Gimel Yud, 13. 13. Right? 13 midas of Rachamim. That God applied here a special act of Rachamim, of Chesed, by dealing with the Kvura of not only the soul, but of actually the body of Moshe Rabbeinu. The 13 attributes of Rachamim. The Misargim Inan, and we explain here in the Gai, I guess what it means is it's translated in the Targum. The source he actually gives is the Tikkun Zohar, from Zohar Chadash. Anyway, the Gai, what is Gai? Is a reference to Tleisa Mechilin Darachami, the 13 chambers of Rachamim, meaning the 13 attributes of Rachamim. Shehen Noivois Bekeser. And these 13 attributes of mercy, they flow out of the Sphero of Keser. For those of you who are with us during the first part of the book, where he was elaborating more on the Yud Gimel Midas Rachamim, he described this, how the Yud Gimel Midas Rachamim actually have their source in Keser, and they flow out from Keser. So the Keser is kind of like a garden from which these 13 rivers of mercy flow. God buried Moshe, Bagai, what's Gai? In these 13 rivers of mercy, which come from Keser. B'fchinosav, haponos lamata, and the aspects of Keter, and these 13 rivers or rivulets of Chesed, which flow down from it, l'rachem b'tachtonim, to bring mercy upon and bathe the lower realms. Umisham ya'ale hanigbar el eden ha'elyon. And from there, the buried person, in this case, we learn from God's burying Moshe Bagai, meaning in the 13 attributes of mercy, which come from Keser, so that when a person is burying a dead person, he will be elevated El Eden Ha'elyon, to the upper garden. What's the upper garden? Chochma shebekeser. The sphere of Chochma which is in Keser. V'tzarich his yashvus hadas b'zeh ma'od. And to understand this, a person has to have a very well-based, very well-established das. I'm not sure how well-established mine is, but I think what he means is that when a person is nifter, he goes to a place which is called oineg. He inherits nachale oineg. And oineg is the acronym for Eden, Nahar, and Gan. Eden is like Gan Eden. Eden is like Eden, yeah. And Nahar is a river, and Gan is the garden. We know that there was a river in the garden of Eden, so that there are actually three different things. Eden actually means a source from which something flows. Edna, for example, in the Torah, which is mentioned in reference to Sarah Menu, she says, you're telling me I have a child? I no longer have Edna. What is Edna? I no longer have a source for the flow of the bodily fluids associated with birth. I'm no longer menstruating. I can no longer lactate. I don't have Eden, meaning I don't have a makor. I don't have a source. And Nahar, therefore, would be the river that flows from the source. Okay? And that river would then flow into the garden, the area that is irrigated by that river which comes from the source. So what he's saying here, I believe, is that when we see that God says that he buried Moshe in the Gai, where the Gai is 13, a reference to the 13 meters of the 13 attributes of mercy, which come from Keser, what we're saying is that when you deal with the dead body, you're elevating it from Gan, which are the lower spheros, which receive the irrigation from the Nahar. The Nahar is Bina, the feminine, the female, from which issues the flow that gives sustenance to the spheros below it. Yeah? That would be the Nahar. That Nahar has an Eden. It has a source, which is in Chochma. Because Chochma has that seminal spark that imparts life into Bina, right? Where Bina then becomes the source of flow, which comes down and sustains, lactates the spheros below it. The next step is to elevate the Eden, which is in Chochma, to the Chochma of Keser. Because Chochma has its own separate entity as a Sphero, which issues from Keser. But since Keser is all-inclusive, within Keser you have an elevated Eden. So they had Eden Elyon and Eden Tachtoin. And what we're talking here about bringing the body through this elevation, it's talking about going from the Gan, that's the Spheros, to Bina, which is the Nahar, the river, which gets its flow from its source in Eden, which is Chochma. But Chochma is Eden Tachton. That Eden Tachton, that lower source, actually has its source in what we call Eden Elyon. What's Eden Elyon? That's Chochma of Keser. So that you actually have Eden Elyon, Eden Tachton, you have then Nahar, and then you have the Gan. And this is the type of elevation that's taking place when we're caring for the needs of the dead body. Beautiful. All right, let's end here. Bezrat Hashem. And try and finish this chapter next time we meet.